A Ford Escape starts at $30,000 in America. A Volkswagen Tiguan starts at $28,500. A Nissan Rogue starts at $29,000. These are basic compact SUVs with cloth seats, plastic interiors, and gasoline engines that cost $60 to fill every week. Now watch this. BYD just launched an electric SUV with leather seats, a panoramic sunroof, a 10-inch touchscreen, and 250 miles of range for $14,000. Not $40,000, not $30,000. $14,000. That's half the price of a used Honda CR-5 with 80,000 miles. This isn't some unsafe Chinese golf cart. This is a legitimate, highway-capable SUV with crash test ratings, modern safety features, and build quality that makes budget American SUVs look like they were assembled by angry teenagers. And it's already on sale in 11 countries, with more launching in 2026. Today, you're finding out exactly how BYD built an electric SUV for less than a base model Kia Soul, why global automakers are having emergency board meetings, and what this means for the collapse of budget gas SUV sales worldwide. The vehicle causing this disruption is the BYD Yuan Up, also sold as the Atto 2 in some markets. And before you dismiss this as another Chinese car you'll never see, understand this: the Yuan Up is already on roads in Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and across Southeast Asia. It launched in South America in late 2024, with pricing starting at $14,800 and immediately became the best-selling electric SUV under $20,000. In Mexico, where it launched at 299,800 pesos, roughly $15,200, it's outselling the Nissan Kicks and Mazda CX-30 in urban markets. This isn't vaporware. This is disrupting markets right now. Let me explain what BYD actually accomplished here, because the economics seem impossible. A $14,000 electric vehicle with 250 miles of range defies everything we understand about EV production costs. Battery packs alone typically cost $7,000 to $10,000 at current sale prices. Add manufacturing, labor, shipping, dealer margins, and you should be looking at a $25,000 minimum price. But BYD isn't operating under the same constraints as Western automakers. And that's what makes this terrifying for Ford, GM, Volkswagen, and Toyota. BYD, which stands for Build Your Dreams, is not just a car company. They're the world's largest EV battery manufacturer, the second largest battery producer overall behind only CATL, and they manufacture their own motors, inverters, and power electronics. They control the entire supply chain vertically. When Ford builds an EV, they buy batteries from LG or SK Innovation, motors from suppliers, inverters from Bosch, and they pay market rates for all of it. When BYD builds an EV, they use their own batteries produced in their own factories using lithium from mines they have direct contracts with. They use motors and inverters manufactured in facilities they own. There's no supplier markup, there's no middleman profit. The cost savings are enormous. But vertical integration alone doesn't explain $14,000. The Yuan Up achieves this price through a combination of platform efficiency, material choices, manufacturing scale, and strategic compromises that don't impact usability but dramatically reduce costs. The Yuan Up measures 4,310 millimeters long, 1,830 millimeters wide, and 1,675 millimeters tall, with a wheelbase of 2,620 millimeters. In American terms, that's slightly smaller than a Honda HR-5 but larger than a Kia Soul. It's proper subcompact SUV dimensions, with enough interior space for 4 adults comfortably and 5 in a pinch. The ground clearance is 175 millimeters, adequate for urban driving and light unpaved roads but not serious off-roading. The design is modern and clean without being offensive. The front end features slim LED headlights, a closed-off grille, since there's no engine to cool, and a simple bumper design with air intakes positioned low for aerodynamic efficiency. The side profile shows short overhangs front and rear, maximizing interior space relative to overall length. The roofline is tall and boxy, prioritizing headroom and cargo volume over sleek aesthetics. Plastic cladding around the wheel arches gives it an SUV appearance. The rear features vertical LED taillights and a simple liftgate with a spoiler integrated into the design. The overall look is functional and contemporary. It won't turn heads, but it doesn't look cheap either. Inside is where the U-Up surprises people, because at $14,000, you expect penalty box interiors with hard plastics and manual windows. But BYD understands that emerging market buyers have smartphones and know what modern interiors should look like. The dashboard features a 1-inch rotating touchscreen that can flip between portrait and landscape orientation, depending on whether you're navigating or watching media. The resolution is decent, and the interface is responsive, running BYD's latest infotainment with Bluetooth connectivity, USB ports, and smartphone mirroring. There's a digital instrument cluster behind the steering wheel displaying speed, battery level, range, and trip information. It's not a massive, high-resolution screen, but it's clear and functional. The seats are wrapped in synthetic leather, not cloth. They're not Nappa leather, they're vinyl, but it looks and feels better than the cloth seats you get in budget American SUVs. The front seats have manual adjustment for recline and fore-aft position. No power adjustment, no heating, no ventilation, but they're comfortable with adequate bolstering and cushioning for long drives. The rear bench seats 3 adults with acceptable legroom and headroom. The middle seat is firm and narrow, like most subcompact SUVs, but the outboard positions are genuinely comfortable. The materials throughout are mostly hard plastic, but the textures are consistent and don't feel brittle. BYD used different surface finishes to create visual interest without adding cost. Some panels have a matte texture, others have subtle grain patterns. The door panels have vinyl covering the upper portions where your arm rests. The steering wheel is wrapped in synthetic leather with a decent grip. There are cup holders, door pockets, and a covered center console storage bin. It's not luxurious, but it's thoughtfully designed and feels more expensive than the price suggests. The panoramic sunroof is standard on most configurations. It's a fixed glass panel, not retractable, but it floods the cabin with natural light and makes the interior feel more spacious. Climate control is manual, not automatic, with physical dials for temperature and fan speed. There's a single-zone system that works adequately. The audio system has 4 speakers, which sounds basic but delivers acceptable sound quality for most listeners. Now, let's talk about what actually matters for an EV, the powertrain and battery. The Up uses a single front-mounted electric motor producing 70 kilowatts or 95 horsepower. That sounds anemic compared to American SUVs, but torque tells the real story. The motor delivers 180 Newton-meters from 0 RPM. That's instant torque with no lag, and it makes the Up feel quicker around town than the horsepower number suggests. 0 to 50 kilometers per hour takes about 3.5 seconds, which is brisk for urban acceleration. Top speed is electronically limited to 130 kilometers per hour, which is 81 miles per hour. That's adequate for highways in most countries. The battery is where BYD's vertical integration creates the cost advantage. The Up uses a 1 kilowatt-hour LFP battery pack, lithium iron phosphate chemistry. LFP batteries are cheaper to produce than NMC batteries. They're more thermally stable, so they're safer. They last longer with less degradation over charge cycles, and they don't require cobalt, which has ethical sourcing concerns. The trade-off is lower energy density, meaning you need a larger, heavier battery to achieve the same range. But for a budget vehicle where cost matters more than weight optimization, LFP is the perfect choice. The 1 kilowatt-hour pack provides 401 kilometers of range on the CLTC cycle used in China. Converting to real-world EPA equivalent range gives approximately 250 miles in mixed driving conditions. That's more range than a Nissan Leaf, more than a Chevy Bolt before it was discontinued, and comparable to entry-level versions of the Hyundai Kona Electric. For urban driving and daily commuting, 250 miles is more than adequate. Most people drive less than 40 miles per day. That's 6 days of commuting on a single charge. Charging uses a standard Chinese GBT connector, which is being adapted to CCS2 for international markets. The Yuan-Up supports up to 40 kilowatt DC fast charging. That's not Tesla supercharger speeds, but it's adequate. Charging from 30 to 80% takes about 50 minutes on a fast charger. For most owners, overnight level 2 charging at home will be the primary method, which takes about 7 hours on a 7 kilowatt home charger. You plug in at night, wake up with a full battery. The simplicity is the point. The suspension is MacPherson strut front and torsion beam rear, which is standard for budget vehicles. It's tuned for comfort rather than sportiness, absorbing bumps and road imperfections adequately. The steering is electric power assisted and feels light at low speeds for easy parking, but weighs up slightly at highway speeds. The brakes are disc front and drum rear, with regenerative braking integrated. The regen system has adjustable levels, allowing you to control how aggressively the vehicle slows when you lift off the accelerator. Safety features are where the Yuan-Up surprises skeptics. It includes 6 airbags, ABS with EBD, electronic stability control, traction control, tire pressure monitoring, and a reversing camera. Higher trims add front and rear parking sensors. The body structure uses high-strength steel in key areas for crash protection. While the Yuan-Up hasn't been tested by Euro NCAP or IIHS yet, it has passed China's CNCAP crash tests with respectable scores. It's not a death trap, it meets modern safety standards. Now, let's address what this actually costs to own, because the $14,000 purchase price is just the beginning of the value proposition. Electricity costs approximately 1/3 of gasoline on a per-mile basis. If you drive 12,000 miles annually, you'll spend roughly $600 on electricity versus $1,800 on gasoline for an equivalent gas SUV getting 30 miles per gallon with gas at $4 per gallon. That's $1,200 annual savings. Over 5 years, you save $6,000 in fuel costs alone. Maintenance costs are dramatically lower. Electric vehicles have no oil changes, no transmission fluid, no spark plugs, no timing belts, no exhaust systems to rust out. The brake pads last longer because regenerative braking handles most of the stopping. You need to rotate tires, replace cabin air filters, refill windshield washer fluid, and eventually replace the 12-volt battery. Annual maintenance costs are typically $200 to $300 for an EV, compared to $800 to $1,200 for a gas vehicle. Over 5 years, that's another $3,000 in savings. Insurance costs depend on the market, but EVs are often cheaper to insure because they have fewer mechanical failures. Registration fees in some regions offer EV discounts. Some cities provide free parking or toll exemptions for EVs. The total cost of ownership over 5 years for the Yuan-Up can be $10,000 to $15,000, less than an equivalent gas SUV, even though the purchase price is already half. Now let me show you what $14,000 buys you in Western markets so you understand how disruptive this is. In America, $14,000 gets you a used 2018 Nissan Rogue with 70,000 miles, unknown maintenance history, and maybe 3 years of life left before major repairs. Or a new Mitsubishi Mirage, which is a penalty box subcompact with a 3-cylinder engine, manual windows, and cloth seats that feel like cardboard. In Europe, 14,000 euros gets you a used Dacia Sandero or a Fiat Panda. These are not aspirational vehicles. The Yuan-Up offers a new vehicle with warranty, zero emissions, modern technology, and operating costs 1/3 of a gas car. For buyers in emerging markets where income levels make $30,000 SUVs unaffordable, this is transformational. For the first time, electric vehicle ownership is accessible to middle-class families in Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, Indonesia, and dozens of other countries. And that's what terrifies global automakers, because once consumers in these markets experience EV ownership, they don't want to go back to gas, the convenience of home charging, the instant torque, the silence, the low operating cost. It's genuinely better for daily driving. BYD isn't just selling a cheap car, they're converting entire markets to electric vehicles ahead of schedule. Let's talk about scale, because that's the other factor enabling this price. BYD produced 302 million vehicles in 2024. They're not a boutique manufacturer. They're building cars at Toyota and Volkswagen volumes. The Yuan Up shares its platform with several other BYD models, including the Dolphin hatchback and the Seagull city car. By spreading development costs across multiple models using the same battery pack, motor, and electrical architecture, BYD amortizes engineering expenses over hundreds of thousands of units. They're manufacturing batteries at a scale that would make Tesla jealous. They're producing electric motors in facilities that run 24/7. The economies of scale are massive. BYD also benefits from Chinese government support. Subsidies for EV production, cheap land for factories, low-interest loans, and favorable regulations all contribute to lower costs. Western automakers operate in markets with higher labor costs, stricter environmental regulations, and less government support for domestic manufacturing. They simply cannot compete on price at this level without losing money on every vehicle. The global impact is already visible. In Thailand, BYD's market share in the EV segment jumped from 8% in 2022 to 42% in 2024. The Yuan Up is a major contributor. In Brazil, where it launched in late 2024, BYD sold 6,800 units in the first 2 months. That's more than Nissan sold of the Kicks in the same period. In Mexico, dealers report waiting lists for the Yuan Up extending 3 months. The demand is real, and it's growing. Traditional automakers are responding, but they're years behind. Volkswagen announced plans for a $25,000 electric SUV in 2027. That's 3 years away, and it'll still cost twice as much as the Yuan Up. Ford canceled plans for a budget EV, citing inability to achieve competitive pricing. GM's Equinox EV starts at $35,000, more than double the Yuan Up. Nissan and Toyota have nothing competitive in development. They're watching market share disappear in real time. The only viable response is tariffs, which is exactly what's happening. The United States maintains a 25% tariff on Chinese vehicles. The European Union is implementing tariffs ranging from 17 to 38% on Chinese EVs. But tariffs don't work in markets where Western automakers aren't competitive anyway: Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, Indonesia. These markets are price sensitive, and Western brands have limited presence. BYD can dominate these regions without ever entering protected markets like the US and EU. And once BYD establishes dominance in 50 countries representing 2 billion people, they'll have the scale and cash flow to eventually overcome tariff barriers through local manufacturing. BYD is already building a factory in Brazil, another in Thailand, and evaluating sites in Mexico and Indonesia. Local production avoids tariffs while creating jobs and political goodwill. Before you decide whether this matters to you, consider subscribing, because the automotive industry is transforming faster than anyone predicted, and most media coverage completely misses what's actually happening in the 80% of the world that isn't America or Europe. So here's what the $14,000 BYD Yuan Up actually represents. It's not just a cheap electric SUV. It's proof that the cost curve for EVs has dropped below the cost curve for gas vehicles in many markets. It's evidence that Chinese manufacturers now control the technology and scale necessary to build vehicles Western brands cannot compete with on price. And it's a warning that the next decade of automotive industry winners and losers will be determined by who can profitably build and sell EVs under $20,000. Western automakers spent the last decade building $50,000 to $100,000 electric SUVs for wealthy buyers in rich countries. They assumed budget EVs were impossible. They were wrong. BYD and other Chinese manufacturers focused on the mass market, developed the technology, achieved the scale, and built the supply chains to make budget EVs profitable. Now they're flooding global markets with vehicles that are good enough, cheap enough, and practical enough to replace gas cars for hundreds of millions of buyers. The Yuan Up won't come to America or Europe anytime soon because tariffs make it uneconomical, but it doesn't need to. There are 6 billion people living outside the US and EU, and most of them can't afford $40,000 vehicles. The yuan up is built for them, and every yuan up sold is one less Toyota, Ford, Nissan, or Volkswagen sold. Market share is shifting, revenue is shifting, profits are shifting, and Western automakers are slowly realizing they missed the most important market segment while chasing luxury margins. The global auto world is shocked because the yuan up proves that cheap electric vehicles are not only possible, they're here now. They're competitive, and they're better than the gas vehicles they're replacing. And there's no credible response from traditional automakers because they can't match this price without destroying their business models. What do you think? If you lived in a market where the yuan up was available, would you buy a $14,000 electric SUV or a $28,000 gas SUV? Let me know in the comments. And if this changed how you understand the global EV transition, hit that subscribe button, because this is just the beginning of the disruption.